the Messiah, love the work and treasure the work of the Messiah, so that we and all of the world might be healed. Amen. One of the interesting things of the Bible is that each book of the Bible has a unique theme or unique focus. And when all of these are put together, we have the story of God taking back creation from Satan, who was bound and determined to destroy it. A couple examples of this. The book of Genesis is about beginnings. It's the beginning of the world as we found it or as we know it. It's the beginning of sin, the beginning of how we got into the mess that we're in. It's the beginning of faith, the beginning of a people of God, God calling out a people to be his own people. It's the beginning of covenants or beginning of relationship with God. Psalms, the focus of Psalms is on worship, opening the heart up to God. There are a lot of things in Psalms that trouble people, some of the things that the psalmist cries out. But you know what? That's the stuff that's in human hearts. The psalmist is simply crying out to God. It's an expression of what's in the human heart, of worship and crying out to God. Proverbs is about wisdom. And of course, the Gospels in the New Testament are the stories of Jesus when he was here on earth. And there's the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is a vision of God's salvation that is coming to the world. Isaiah shows us through this vision how God is going to fix the world, how God is going to save the world. And for the most part, God is going to take the creation that has been marred, almost destroyed by Satan, and remake it, reclaim it, and remake it. The contemporary vision of salvation today is that God takes us to heaven when we die and to hell with the world. The world is going to hell. That's the contemporary vision of it. Isaiah knows nothing of that. Isaiah's vision of salvation doesn't include going to heaven. It is, and that doesn't mean that we don't go there. Believe me, we do. I believe that we do. The New Testament is fairly clear on that. But Isaiah's vision is of God taking the world and not destroying it, but of remaking it, of reclaiming his creation, of taking it back out of the hands of Satan, who was bound and determined to destroy it. And of course, the way God is going to do that, it's through the work of the Messiah, the servant that he sends into the world. The Messiah will bring the world under the reign of God and will reestablish a God-centered world. Now, during Advent this year, we have been looking into the book of Isaiah, learning some things about this Messiah, looking at pictures of the Messiah that Isaiah gives us. We saw that the Messiah will bring hope into a world where there isn't much hope. We saw that the Messiah will bring light into a very, very dark, spiritually dark and morally dark world. We saw that the Messiah will give himself, give his life to save the world. And a couple of weeks ago, we noticed that when the Messiah is here, people will say, "Oh, God is with us," because God will take on upon himself flesh and blood, become a human being, and God will be with us in a special way. And today we want to see the last of these pictures that we're going to be looking at from Isaiah. And it is that when the Messiah comes, the Messiah is going to heal the world. Now, perhaps you've noticed, maybe you haven't noticed, that there are 4 different texts for today. That doesn't mean that we're going to be here till noon. It simply means that Isaiah has so many pictures, so many parts of this vision are about the healing of the world, the healing that is coming to the world. And I've chosen 4 of these this morning. There are more of these. But there are four, because there are four basic dimensions to the healing of the world. Four different areas in which the Messiah is bringing healing to the world. And I want to notice these this morning, point out these four different dimensions. The first of these is from Isaiah chapter 61. The Messiah, when he comes, will bring a spiritual healing to the world, particularly to human beings. There is a spiritual healing, a deep inner healing that heals the deep wounds that nothing and no one has been able to heal. The Messiah will bring healing to the world. The prophet begins this chapter, this vision of inner healing this way. The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. The Messiah will bring good news. Now, those who first heard this, those who first saw this vision, who first heard this vision, the people who first received this vision were people in exile in Babylon. And the news came to them, you're free. You can go back to Jerusalem. You can go back to Judea. You're free to go home. Your captivity has ended. And the overtones of this have rung throughout history ever since for God's people. You no longer are captive to the things that would destroy you. Your captors are freeing you. Satan has to free you. You are free. You are free from captivity. You are free. You are released from captivity. And of course, Jesus claimed that he was the one who brought good news as well. The good news is tied to the ministry of Jesus and to the work of Jesus, the Messiah. In Luke chapter 4, when Jesus inaugurated his ministry, when he began his ministry, Jesus quoted this part of Isaiah. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom or release for the captives. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That's how Jesus began his ministry. And of course, wherever Jesus went, he healed people. It's very significant that a very, very large part of Jesus' work here on this earth was healing. Because that's the beginning of what he is going to do for all of the world. He is going to heal the earth. He is going to heal the world. Of course, when Jesus went from place to place, he healed, and people didn't want to see him leave. A few verses after he inaugurated his ministry, Jesus said, "I need to go someplace else." And the people said, "No, don't leave. We don't want you to go." And Jesus said, and this is in verse 43 of Luke 4, Jesus said, "I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns also." At the very end of Jesus' ministry, when Jesus had died and he rose from the dead and he was meeting with his disciples just before he ascended into heaven. And this is what he said to them: "Go into all the world and preach the good news." The work of Jesus, the work that he began, the work that he is going to do is good news for the world. It is good news. And Isaiah continues with this. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to heal those with broken hearts, to proclaim freedom for the captives, to release from darkness the prisoners. When Jesus quotes this in Luke 4, he says, to give sight to the blind. That's how he interprets this part of releasing those who are in darkness. He gives sight to the blind. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The Lord will heal the brokenhearted, will free the captives, and release the prisoners, those who have been bound by the strongholds of Satan, those who have been crushed by the brokenness of this world, will find healing through the Messiah. And so dramatic is this healing, this inner healing. Isaiah points this picture to us, beginning with the end of verse 2. He will come to comfort those who mourn, to provide for those who grieve in Zion, bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, oil of gladness instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. What Isaiah is picturing, what Isaiah is showing, is somebody that is in such deep mourning. They are wearing funeral clothes. It's as if they have lost somebody and there is nothing in this world that can console them. They're in deep, deep mourning. And Isaiah sees that the funeral clothes will be taken off of those who have been healed, and they will be given a garment. They will be given clothes to go to a banquet. They will take off the ashes that they have put on their head. They will be given a crown. They are taking off their garments of mourning and wearing garments to go to a banquet. The transformation of those who receive this spiritual healing, this inner healing, is so dramatic. Isaiah sees that people who are in deep, deep mourning, who can't be consoled, will all of a sudden burst forth in celebration. The captives are going to be freed. Those with broken hearts, who wet their pillows at night with their tears, who cry themselves to sleep at night, are going to burst forth with praise. There will be praise on their lips and not tears in their eyes. In fact, this change, this inner transformation of those who receive the spiritual healing that the Messiah is giving is so dramatic that their name will even be changed. Isaiah says they will be called oaks of righteousness. They will appear as a different person. They will appear differently because they will be different, because of the inner healing, the spiritual healing that the Messiah is bringing. A quick glance at the rest of this chapter, and we have a lot more to look at, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but the rest of this is really significant as well. In verse 4, their work has changed. What they do and why they do it is dramatically changed. Look at what they do. In verse 4, they rebuild the ancient ruins. They restore places devastated. They renew the ruined cities. They work for something much bigger than themselves. They work for something other than just a paycheck. They work to rebuild the world that has been destroyed by sin, that has been destroyed by Satan. They work to bring healing. They work with God to bring healing into the world. They work for something much bigger than themselves. And they receive an inner cleansing. Verse 7, their shame is taken away. Their guilt is taken away. Instead of shame, instead of walking around with guilt, carrying burdens of guilt, they receive a double portion. In other words, they receive a double blessing instead of shame. Instead of disgrace, they receive an inheritance. Reminds me of the story of the prodigal son who left his father and left his home. And after years, he came back with pig manure between his toes, smelling like a pig pen. And he came and he said, "Father, I've disgraced you. I've disgraced your name. I've disgraced our family. I don't deserve to be called your son. I don't deserve to be in this family anymore." And his father grabbed him and said, "Go put my robe on him. He is my son." Instead of disgrace, those who receive this inner healing from the Messiah will receive a great, great inheritance. They will be called sons and daughters. They will be called children of God. They will receive a great, great healing, an inner healing. They will begin to reflect the values of the Lord. Verse 8, for I, the Lord, love justice, hate robbery and iniquity. Instead, there will be faithfulness, and they will live in covenant. I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Those who receive this inner healing that the Messiah is bringing, this spiritual healing, will begin to reflect the values of God. They will do that because God lives in them. The Spirit of the Messiah will actually live in them. And notice the result that happens. What comes into the world when people are healed spiritually? Verse 11, the last verse in this chapter. As the soil makes a sprout come up and the garden causes weeds to grow, the sovereign Lord, because the sovereign Lord will live in those who have been spiritually healed, those who have received this inner healing. The sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. They will display righteousness and praise in the world that was filled with despair and with mourning. Not only will the Messiah bring an inner healing, a spiritual healing to the deep spiritual wounds that people have, the deep spiritual wounds of this world. A second dimension of healing that the Messiah brings, we find in Isaiah 35. The Messiah will bring physical healing. First, there was spiritual healing. Now there is physical healing. The Messiah will bring physical healing to the earth itself and to the inhabitants of the world, to people. This chapter begins, the desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. The wasteland no longer will be wasteland. You know, they say that 30 to 35% of the earth, of the land surface, it doesn't include the oceans, is covered in desert and wilderness. It's a place that's unproductive. It's wasteland. And reading through this chapter, you get a feeling that the wastelands, the deserts of the world, the wildernesses of the world are longing and crying out to be part of the production of the world. They want to be productive too. They are crying out to be a part of the beauty, to be a part of the production that the rest of the world experiences. They long to join in with the grain fields and with the forests and the orchards and the gardens of the world that bring food, that bring beauty, that are so filled with life. Instead of being a wasteland, they long to be productive themselves. And Isaiah sees, as part of the healing of the world, the day is coming when the Messiah will heal the land itself and make all of the world productive. There will be no more wasted land. There will be no more wasted space on the earth, but all will join in the renewal of the earth. And it's not only for the earth, the people of the earth. Down in verse 5, for the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame will leap like a deer, the mute tongue will shout for joy. The day is coming when the Messiah will bring healing to the inhabitants of the earth. There will be no more wasted limbs that don't work. There will be no more ears that don't hear. There will be no more eyes that don't see. There will be no more legs that are weak and can't carry a body, that can't walk or run. There will be no more hands and arms that can't work and do things. The healing that the Messiah brings includes the wasted parts of human life. It will include those who look around and say, my life is meaningless. My life is worthless. I have no purpose in life. Healing will come to them and they will realize my life does have great value. That's part of healing. My life does have value and purpose and meaning. No longer will there be no wasted land. There will be no wasted limbs. There will be no wasted lives. All will be made whole and function as God created them to function. And the end of this chapter, over in verses 8 and 9, Isaiah shows us a vision of a moral healing that is coming to society as well. Verse 8, and a highway will be there. Not just a path, but a highway, a super highway. It will be called the Way of Holiness. There will be a new way to go through the world. There will be a new way to live in this world. It will be a highway. It will be called the Way of Holiness. Those who are unclean will not walk in that way. Wicked fools will not go about in that way. Fraud and deception and cheating will be something of the past. This highway, this new way to live in the world of those who receive this healing is to be holy, to live a holy life. And Isaiah continues in verse 9, there won't be any lions there, no ferocious beasts will get up on this way, because the dangers that would destroy life, that would destroy people, have been taken away. There is no danger in this new way to live that the prophet sees when the Messiah comes and heals the world. Now, it's quite fascinating to me, and I'm going to point this out at each of these scriptures that we looked at. I don't know if you listened to the news this past week. I had trouble listening to it. I had trouble listening to the news all year long, to be honest with you. And in fact, I don't listen to much news. And the reason is the world is so filled with mourning, with lamenting, with crying out, with lies, to be honest with you, of stuff that isn't true. But when the healing of the Messiah comes, Isaiah shows us from chapter 61 that all of a sudden the world will be filled with righteousness and with praise. Instead of all of the crying out and the mourning, the world is going to be filled with praise. And here, the end of chapter 35, the world is going to be filled with gladness and joy. And it's not that people say, well, now, I guess I've come to the Messiah, I've come to Christ now, I should be joyful. No. Joy and gladness overtake them. It's as if you're running and somebody that can run faster than you overtakes you. Joy and gladness are simply going to overtake the world. Sorrow and sighing will flee away. There's a new sound that is coming to this world. There's a third image, a third dimension of healing that the Messiah will bring. And for this, let's notice Isaiah chapter 11. The image of healing, the dimension of healing that Isaiah gives us in this chapter is that there will be a healing of nature itself. And Isaiah shows us several of these images, very similar to the one that we're looking at this morning. And I simply chose one. It happens to be this: the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. Has there ever been a child that has not dreamed of having a lion or a bear or a deer for a pet? That has not been fascinated with the beasts of the world and wished some way to walk with them, to be friends with them, to have them as a pet? Isaiah sees the time coming when that is exactly what's going to happen. Isn't that fascinating? God puts this image in children, in innocent children who have not experienced all of the pain and the brokenness and sorrow of the world. And Isaiah sees that someday it will happen. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant that doesn't know any better will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child will put his hand in the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all of my holy mountain. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord. There will be peace in nature. We looked at this passage a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to comment much on it, other than to point out that the healing of the earth includes animals. It includes nature. It includes all that God created. And we begin to see here a thorough healing of the world. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is left out of the healing that is coming. Nature itself will receive a new nature. There will be no more fear. There will be no more threats. The nature of animals will be changed to something as it was in the Garden of Eden, where animals were not afraid of each other and were not afraid of human beings. This healing of the world that includes the healing of nature will bring harmony once again to the whole world, will bring harmony to all of nature, to all of God's creation. When God created the world, there was harmony between all of God's creatures. There was harmony in all of creation. And the Messiah is going to restore that. That is part of the work of the Messiah. And finally, the last image, the last dimension of healing that we're looking at is from Isaiah chapter 2. This was actually the first image of healing that God showed to Isaiah. But we're looking at it at the end here. It's probably the greatest of the healings, the greatest dimension of healing that is coming. And that is, it is